At Aero 547 local time, on the Pokrovsk axis, a Russian rifle company starts walking toward a trench line that has been watching them for 20 minutes. Fog holds visibility to 250 meters, and the 30 men crossing the open ground believe that fog is on their side. Fog hides light, it does not hide heat. 400 meters ahead, behind the wire, thermal optics have been tracking every one of them since the line of departure. Over the next 50 minutes, that company loses 2 BMP-2s, a motorcycle flanking element, a Cornet team, 2 fiber optic FPVs, and a Lancet. At 0637, the surviving Russian quick reaction force surrenders in writing on the lid of an ammunition crate, read back through the thermal camera of a drone hovering at 400 feet. What the first commander needed 25 minutes to work out, that QRF worked out in 90 seconds. The trench they were assaulting had nobody in it. Not a thinned out platoon, not a skeleton crew, 0 human beings across 10 kilometers of front, and every step of the Russian assault manual fails against that for a different reason. The lead squad is at 250 meters when the trench line opens up. 4 bursts of 50 caliber inside half a second, and the squad is prone. 3 of them permanently. The sergeant behind them goes down mid-gesture, engaged in the instant he drops to one knee to signal. What the survivors report over the net is not fire from a position. It is the absence of everything that should come with it. No muzzle smoke drifting off the parapet. No silhouette rising to aim. No movement in the fighting position at all. The gun tracks, fires, and returns to center, and nothing around it moves. Here is the arithmetic those bursts are running. The machine putting rounds into that squad costs about $20,000. The BMP-2 rolling up behind them to fix the problem costs roughly $1.5 million. That is trading an arcade token for a car, and Ukraine can spend 100 tokens a month. The Russian platoon commander does what the manual says. Fire and maneuver. One element goes to ground and puts suppressive fire into the trench line, while the second element bounds right using a hedgerow for cover. Suppression is a psychological transaction. You put rounds close enough to a man's head that he stops looking, stops aiming, presses himself into the dirt for the 3 or 4 seconds you need to cover ground. It has worked in every war since machine guns existed, and it works because a man will always choose to live. The turret does not go down, it tracks left onto the bounding element while incoming rounds are still striking the earth berm in front of it, and it engages at 410 meters. 2 men down before the bound is finished. 800 meters behind the wire, in a bunker dug 9 meters into the ground, 6 operators are watching this on screens. Coffee going cold on a plank shelf. One of them has a thumbstick under his right hand. What they are driving is a droid TW-12.7, call sign Hornet 1. Tracked chassis, 1100 kilograms, roughly the footprint of a ride-on lawnmower. On top of it sits a stabilized remote weapon station carrying an M2 Browning 50 caliber, a design finalized in 1933 and still the most brutal heavy machine gun in service anywhere on Earth. Between 480 and 1,000 rounds on board depending on configuration. Engagement range out to a kilometer, thermal detection to 1,500 meters in daylight, 1,000 at night, which is why the fog stopped mattering at the line of departure. The ballistic computer solves for lead, drift, and drop 400 times a second, which is autocorrect for a bullet's trajectory, running continuously while the target moves. Onboard AI flags human shapes off the first pixel that moves against the background. Communications run digital over Starlink and LTE, and the software splits control across up to 3 operators, 1 on the gun, 1 driving the platform, a 3rd running the fight from the command console. Now run the Russian assault doctrine against that. Suppression requires a head that ducks. There is no head. Fire and maneuver requires an enemy who can be bluffed, and a bluff only works if the other side is capable of being bluffed. Attrition requires an enemy who tires, whose hands shake at minute 40, who runs out of the will to keep looking through the optic. The platform does not get tired. Kill the gunner is the oldest answer in infantry warfare, and the gunner is 800 meters back, underground, holding a plastic joystick. 25 seconds after the first burst, the company commander says the sentence over the net, "There is nobody in the trench." The answer to a machine gun you cannot suppress is a bigger gun with more reach, and the Russians have one. A BMP-2 pulls into a firing position at 600 meters and opens with its 2A42 autocannon, 30mm, roughly 10 rounds per second on the high rate, and a reach that comfortably outranges the 50. That is the entire tactical logic of the vehicle. Stand where the infantry weapon cannot answer and dismantle the position from there. It takes the gunner about 4 seconds to walk his rounds onto the hedgerow line and start chewing it apart. While he is doing that, something is crossing the broken ground on his flank. Spike 1 is a Ratel S, a Ukrainian wheeled kamikaze ground drone, electric motor, no engine note to give it away, 22 to 24 kilometers an hour flat out, 6 kilometers of battery range, 4 kilometers of practical working distance with a confirmed kill logged at 6.3. It carries up to 35 kilograms of explosive or 2 anti-tank mines. On this run, it is carrying 14 kilos of TNT. Unit cost is about $20,000, and Ukraine builds up to 100 of them a month. This is not a prototype. In March 2023, near Ivanivske in Donetsk, a Ratel S carrying a MO-90 and 12 kilos of TNT drove under a bridge and dropped it. Spike 1 covers 280 meters of broken ground in 56 seconds. The BMP gunner never sees it because his thermal sight is locked forward on the heat bloom of Hornet 1's barrel, the brightest thing in his field of view and exactly where the Ukrainians want his attention. The Ratel reaches the rear quarter of the vehicle where armor is thinnest and the engine block sits and detonates. The second BMP moves up to recover the crew and takes a wasp through the turret ring. A first-person view drone, $1,200, flown down onto the one horizontal gap in the vehicle's armor. Both vehicles are out in 4 minutes. $3 million of Russian armor against roughly $17,000 of Ukrainian hardware. With the armor gone, the Russians go back to speed. 14 motorcycles, 2 men on each, running an approach lane 120 meters wide between hedgerows at 60 kilometers an hour. It is a genuinely good decision. A machine gun turret has a traverse rate, and 28 men moving that fast in a dispersed column can be inside the position before the gun services even half of them. They are using ground they have studied. An Orlan 10 reconnaissance drone photographed that lane 3 weeks earlier, and the imagery shows a clean run. What 3-week-old imagery cannot show is soil that was turned over at 0330 that morning. A MON-90 directional mine is a curved steel plate packed with explosive behind roughly 2,000 steel fragments, throwing them in a 60-degree arc. It detonates 30 meters in front of the lead bikes, into the face of the column, and the arc catches riders across the width of the lane. The ones who survive go off the machines into the hedgerow and start crawling forward, which is the correct infantry response. And the Eastern Hornet, which has been sitting silent and unrevealed through the entire engagement, opens onto the hedgerow line and closes it. The mine was placed hours in advance by a machine that leaves no thermal signature while it waits. There was nothing to spot with a drone at 0330 because there was no body out there giving off heat. 25 minutes in, the Russians finally aim at something that can actually be hurt. The first attempt is a Kornet, a 9M133 on a tripod launcher, 27 kilograms of missile with a tandem heat warhead that punches through more than 1,000 millimeters of armor after defeating reactive plating, guided by laser beam riding out to 5.5 kilometers. The operator holds the laser spot on the target, and the missile rides the reflection all the way in. It is a weapon built to kill things that weigh 40 tons and cannot dodge. Hornet 1 reverses out of the laser spot in 2.5 seconds. The missile is a hunting dog trained to follow a scent, sent after something that has no scent. It goes where the reflection was, not where the machine is. Then the company commander sees the thing that actually matters. For about 1/4 of a second, through his optic, the glass face of the thermal housing on Hornet 1 rotates and catches the light. Not the chassis, not the gun, a lens. His next order is the correct one, and it comes 23 minutes too late to matter. Hit the sensor clusters. The Russians put 2 fiber optic FPV drones onto that instruction. A fiber drone trails a single mode filament about 1/4 of a millimeter thick, carrying video one way and commands the other as pulses of light inside glass. There is no radio signal in the air, which means there is nothing to jam. The signal is in the glass, not in the sky. Russian units have flown these out to 20 and 30 kilometers on a spool. The Shaponik Arrow electronic warfare complex sitting on the Russian line, capable of shutting down conventional drone control links across a wide band, is completely irrelevant against them. Trying to jam a fiber drone is trying to switch off a flashlight by shouting at it. That cuts both ways, which is why the Russians can reach the sensors at all. Both drones hit clusters. Hornet 1's primary thermal is burned out. Germanium optics carbonized. Hornet 3 takes the same treatment. Both platforms drop back onto reserve optics and go effectively blind past 400 meters. The last card is a Lancet, a Zala loitering munition, catapult launched, 12 kilograms all up with a 3 kilogram warhead, cruising at 110 kilometers an hour and diving onto the target at 300, guided by an electro-optical seeker. The X-52 variant costs about $40,000. It gets 55 seconds of flight before a Wasp interceptor meets it at 300 feet of altitude and puts it into the field. The commander decoded the problem correctly. He identified the single real vulnerability of a robotic position. The sensors are the crew, and the crew is made of glass. And by the time he had it, his FPV inventory was 0, and his Lancet inventory was 0. He had the right answer and nothing left to write it with. Ukrainian command reads the pause as collapse and gives the order. All platforms push up. That order inverts the entire mathematics of the engagement. In the fighting positions, the robots are dug in, hull down behind Earth, presenting a target the size of a large dog. Out of the revetments and moving across open ground toward the Russian trench line, they are 1,100 kilogram objects moving at 7 kilometers an hour in daylight, and 7 kilometers an hour is a walking pace for a howitzer battery. 22 kilometers east, a battery of 2 S-3 Akatsiya self-propelled guns has been listening to the radio traffic. Soviet-designed 152mm, firing in 4-round salvos. The Russian battalion commander starts walking rounds onto the Ukrainian formation 90 seconds before the pursuit order is even given, because he can see where this is going. The first salvo brackets Hornet 3 and takes its remaining sensor. The second lands 30 meters short of Hornet 2, which loses a section of track, drops to 4 kilometers an hour, and keeps firing while it limps. The trench falls at Zosix Waitin. The Russians who stay in it discover the last thing the machines are bad at. A turret cannot depress into its own trench line, and a tracked chassis does not go down a step, so Spike 3 goes in instead. A Ratel driven straight down into the trench and detonated. At 0624, a 152mm shell lands 12 meters from the Ukrainian rearm point. The reloading platform is destroyed. Mule 1, the logistics robot carrying fresh belts and a charged battery pack, is hit square, halfway across. Hornet 1 is at 17% battery, Hornet 2 at 9, Hornet 3 has been reloaded, and Hornet 4 hasn't. 4 armed platforms holding 400 meters of captured trench, sharing 1 belt of ammunition between them. Every tactic the Russians had was built to make a man flinch. There was no man in that trench. Suppression is a bluff that requires an enemy who can be bluffed. Attrition requires an enemy who tires. Killing the gunner requires the gunner to be within 5 kilometers of the gun. Fear is not a side effect of Russian assault doctrine. It is the mechanism. Remove the capacity to feel fear from the defending side and the doctrine does not degrade. It stops functioning entirely, which is why 30 men with 2 armored vehicles lost to 6 people underground with joysticks. The Russian quick reaction force arrives at Zosix-33 to retake the position. They redo the first commander's calculation in 90 seconds. No return fire pattern that matches a human crew. No bodies in the captured trench. No one to shoot at. At 0637, they write their surrender in grease pencil on the lid of an ammunition crate and hold it up to the sky, and it is read back through the thermal camera of a $5,000 Mavic 3T orbiting at 400 feet. And the position that beat them was, at that exact moment, almost out of ammunition. That is the real ceiling, and it has nothing to do with courage. The robot does not die of bullets. It dies of battery. 14 kilograms of TNT solves a BMP-2. Nothing in the inventory solves a destroyed rearm point 12 meters from 152mm impact. A droid TW-12.7 has held a firing position for 45 consecutive days, but it was pulled back every 48 hours for maintenance and recharge, and that cycle is the documented operational standard. The sword arm outruns the supply line. It is running a marathon without carrying water. An army that plans to assault a robotic position and aims at the machines is aiming at the wrong thing. The machines are not the position. The rearm point is the position, and it sits behind an 800-meter cable of logistics that a single artillery battery 22 kilometers away can cut in one salvo. 30 men surrendered to a trench with nobody in it. but that trench was holding 400 meters of front line. Now imagine the same idea aimed at something Russia spent 30 years building, the air defense ring around Moscow itself. That's the video on your screen right now, and it ends the way this one did, with Russians looking at something they had no answer for. Click it, and if you want more of these, subscribe. I break down one of these every week.